I would like to welcome Sarah and Mark and Andrew is online from LGFA, no mai haere mai, and I think same presentation and then questions. Yep. Beautiful, thank you.
So I'll just quickly introduce the team. Most of you have probably met Mark Butcher, who is the Chief Executive of LGFA here in and provides all of our funding. And then we've got Andrew Meikle online. I don't know what Andrew's title is. He's the brains behind the operation and knows all the things. So we'll have him. What am I then, Tim? No. And so we've got Andrew online to answer questions as well. The LGFA team have pulled together a quick presentation to talk about anything and everything water, and then we'll open up to questions through you, Chair. Yep.
And we'll go. Okay. Thank you, councillors. Look, I've got Andrew Meikle online. He sends his apologies. He's been up at Gisborne today. So it's a fairly busy time for us as we go around quite a few councils to obviously talk about local water done well and everything else that's going on in the sector as well too. So, but I will probably just for efficiencies, I'll go through the slides, then we can beam Andrew in for the hard questions that I'm sure you're going to ask us. So, look, just LGFA on a page. We were established in 2012, so coming up 12 years now. Had a really great relationship with Wellington City Council right from the start. The council was one of the original 9 who funded the experiment or the laboratory where LGFA was developed. You are the second largest shareholder, joint equal, with a group of other shareholders behind the Crown. You're our third largest borrower. You've got $1.6 billion borrowed from us. So that's just under 8% of our lending to the sector comes to Wellington City Council. You're also the third largest or third equal largest guarantor of LGFA as well too. So really integral to both organisations. Sarah plays a great role as well too. So Wellington City Council is on the Shareholders Council. So that is a governance overlay that basically is overseeing the board. And so Sarah is Deputy Chair, so that's really, really good. So in terms of what we are, we're just a funding conduit. We were set up, as I said, 12 years ago. We modelled ourselves on, there's a number of similar entities around the world. We model ourselves on the Nordic examples in Norway, Sweden, and some of them have been going since about 1890. So they're a well-proven model. The idea is that we have the same credit rating as the New Zealand government at AAA, so that means that we can borrow cheaper, we can borrow for longer term, and we can hopefully always borrow. So it means that we can then pass on that debt to you really cheaply and also during really difficult market conditions. In terms of where we've got to over the years, thanks to your help and the rest of the councils in New Zealand, we've now got 77 out to 78 councils are borrowers. The only borrower who's not is the Chatham Islands District Council. We have approved them, but they don't want to join. I think they've got about $650,000 of debt. So we've said that they can join us, but obviously it doesn't make economic sense. And also, I don't think that Andrew really wants to fly out to the Chatham Islands as well too. But I think, so you sort of see the growth in the membership on the left-hand side there. So we've got 77 councils. We've actually got 6 CCOs as well too, and I'll talk about those shortly. Then just on the right-hand side of that chart there, you sort of see that is the total bars are the borrowing of the sector going back to 2005, and then the green lines are what LGFA lends on an annual basis. So you see that we came along at a time when the sector debt was increasing, but also because of a high market share, we have over 90% of sector borrowing comes through LGFA. That's why our green bar is quite dominant there. That's the top line is our lending to the sector. So you've seen it's been fairly rapid growth, particularly over the last 5 years. We've now got $20.6 billion of loans to the sector. Going back 5 years ago, we only had about $9 or $10 billion, but that's obviously as a function as the sector's been borrowing. Where we get our borrowing from, where do we source our capital? So bottom left-hand side there, 76% comes from New Zealand dollar bonds. So we issue, all our bonds are listed on the New Zealand Stock Exchange. We have around about 5% of those are held by retail investors. In 2023, we started to move into offshore markets, so that's the orange bar there. So around 16% of our funding now comes from Australia. That's the closest market to us. And then we have another 8% of our funding is short-dated funding, less than 1 year. Then on the right-hand side at the bottom right, of that New Zealand dollar section, about 34%, or 6.7 billion, comes from offshore investors. So these are Japanese life insurance companies, they are sovereign wealth funds, they are overseas central banks, they are European pension funds. Then we have about $6 billion comes from the 4 major domestic banks here. Then we have the KiwiSaver providers. Then we have retail investors in the Reserve Bank. So it's quite a well-diversified funding source. Right, of relevance now is the lending to CCO. So back in 2017, Waikato Water was being floated as an idea at the time. It didn't actually go ahead, but we felt then that we could not actually lend to a Waikato Water back 7 years ago if they were set up. Also, Dunedin City Council borrows through a subsidiary, so they borrow through a CCTO. And we're finding there was a number of councils were borrowing from us and then lending down to their CCOs. So that's why we went to our shareholders in 2019 and we said, look, can we please put in place the ability to lend to CCOs? And by doing that, we said that there would be no additional risk. So they had to be supported by their parent councils. They had to be 100% owned by the councils. The council shareholders had to be guarantors. So that was actually quite fortuitous because obviously it set us up now for when the water CCOs are being touted as an idea that we could actually, without a huge amount of refocusing of the business at LGFA, we could actually lend to water CCOs. We do have one multiply owned CCO as well too. So Infrastructure Holdings, which is the Nelson City Tasman District Council JV, which holds the port and airport. That's a multiply owned CCO. So we've had experience as well of dealing with a multiply owned CCO. So water reforms. 8th of August, we announced alongside the Minister of Local Government that LGFA would be able to lend to water organisations, provided that they were CCOs and provided that they were financially supported by the parent councils. We said that we could lend to either singly owned or multiply owned organisations as well too. We were indifferent between it from a financing point of view. Importantly, we believe that these water entities can take on greater leverage, so they can actually borrow more than what a normal council could actually borrow. We also said that they had to be supported by councils financially. So because you, Wellington City Council, are a guarantor, we've got to protect the interests of our guarantors. So therefore, we had to make sure that we were actually lending on a like basis. And so that's why we've come out and said that we cannot lend to a water care or we can't lend to a community trust because they are not being financially supported by their shareholders. So that's a key distinction of what we can do. So it does narrow up who we can actually lend to. The Minister has asked us to look as to whether or not in the future we could lend to an unsupported water organisation. We've said that we'll consider that, but at the moment our priority is to lend to water CCOs on behalf of councils. The second announcement we made on the 8th of August as well too is that there's a small number of high growth councils who are up or coming up or forecast to come up against their debt limits in the future. And the debt limits are imposed by LGFA. So what we've done, we've gone away and we've thought about how we could actually accommodate. So this are the likes of the Taurongas, the Hamiltons, the Waipars, the Queenstown, who need to do a lot more infrastructure, need to borrow a lot more. So what we've done is that we are going to our shareholders next week at the AGM, and we're going to ask them to give the LGFA board approval to allow a bespoke financial covenant for these eligible high growth councils so they can actually borrow more. There is going to be a number of strings attached to it. It's not going to be open to everyone, but will on a case-by-case basis potentially provide some short-term relief for those councils. This is really, I'll talk to these next couple of slides just on the water CCOs. These are sort of Andrew's slides, but let me try and talk to them. So what's the advantage of a water CCO for a council? So councils will be able to free up their debt headroom on their own balance sheet. And that's largely from an LGFA perspective. We measure financial covenants of councils at the parent level. We don't look at it at the group level. So what that means is that we won't look at a water CCO when we're calculating the financial covenants of the parent council. I also said that we'll allow these water CCOs to borrow more. And that's because for a number of factors. One, they're a regulated utility. We've seen a strong historical case of offshore pairs where these regulated water entities can actually borrow more. We're expecting them to have independent commercial boards, so the directors will be really focused on liquidity going concern. And importantly too, they will have ring-fenced revenue. So the revenue will be against those assets. There will be an economic return on those assets as well too. So that's why we think that councils through the water CCO, so the water CCOs owned by the councils can actually borrow more than what a normal council could actually borrow. We will expect, we will have covenants in place. They won't be exactly the same covenants as what applies to a council, but they will be similar covenants. But the sector, the industry, looks at funds from operation to debt rather than debt to revenue. So they're a slightly different set of covenants. The covenants will be consistent with an investment grade credit rating, or we would expect that these water CCOs will have a pathway to achieving an investment grade credit rating over time. So there might be some uncertainty on day one. The boards might not be having a pathway immediately to get to an investment grade credit rating, but we'd expect they would do over time. And that's probably it from that. And then from the balance sheet separation point of view, just a couple of points here. So we feel that these CCOs need to be asset owning, they need to be debt owning. We don't think that a shared services model will actually achieve balance sheet separation. So I think that's really important. So we're sort of wanting these entities to have full asset ownership. They've got to be financially supported by councils. They can then join LGFA. They can get access to the higher debt levels as well too. So that's really important. So what we're looking for obviously is independent governance. We're looking for independent revenue mechanism as well too, and we're looking for investment grade credit metrics. So I think that's the important features that we're looking for. So look, we're only the financiers as well too. So Crown Infrastructure Partners are the experts on everything. DIA is experts on policy and regulations. Okay, so we're only focused on finance. But happy to take questions.
We have some. The first one's from Councillor Rogers.
Yeah, it kind of goes to what Crown Infrastructure Partners were talking about a little bit earlier, where they were considering the work they had done with S&P. Councils would be rated as if the debt of CCOs that are owned wholly by them would be amalgamated in their credit rating. So when you're doing are you saying when you do your internal rating, you wouldn't consider it the same way that S&P is?
Correct. Andrew, I'll let you answer that, but the short answer is yes.
Yes, so the rating agencies tend to look at the balance sheet of a council at group level. As Mark mentioned, LGFA will do a different treatment. We will measure the covenants at the council level, as is currently the case, and the water entity will have separate financial sort of covenants. So, but DIA and Treasury have done some testing with S&P on different levels of ownership. So where a council owns less than 50% of a water CCO, then it won't be aggregated by S&P. It will be treated as a contingent liability. But if you own more than 50%, then S&P will consolidate that debt. So in the case where you own 100%, will be consolidated. But the key point is LGFA will have a different treatment.
Cool, thank you.
Councillor Pannett.
Thank you. So a key thing about this is the ability to borrow more. How is there going to be adequate consumer protection for those who are then having to pay for this, essentially? And I know there's a consumer charter, but the accountability measures, which seem to be quite widely acknowledged, aren't that strong. I know there's some regulation, but we have little ability to rein them in if this happens.
I think that might be more for the work stream that came before.
Yeah, I'm not sure this is a question for LGFA.
Well, except if people are borrowing more, is there, what are you considering how this is going to impact on the people who have to pay for it? I mean, because if people can't pay, then you don't get your money.
Yeah. So Andrew does a credit assessment of every. Yeah, so we undertake a credit assessment of every borrower, be it a council, be it a CCO, and there's a number of metrics that we actually assess it on. Some of it is around population growth, affordability as well too. So we do look at it in terms of the credit quality of the borrower. I think we also have to have some faith or confidence in the economic regulator as well too, which is obviously outside of our area.
So can I just jump in there? So,
yes.
So the way the regime will work is you have two regulators: the water regulator, which is Te Mata Arawai, and the economic regulator, which will be the Commerce Commission. So you have those sort of structures in the likes of Australia and the UK. So the economic regulator will have controls over how much a water entity can charge, and you're seeing that play out in the UK with Thames Water, whereas the company wants to increase prices over the next 5 years reasonably significantly, and the economic regulator is saying, no, you can't do that. You see that happen in the case of airports as well. The economic regulator determines the prices that the airport can charge for landing charges.
Can I ask one quick one? Just this thing about the water entity eligible to join the LGFA, does that potentially put these water entities on the same kind of level as councils, and would there be then any risk of struggles for gaining funding for various projects? It just seems like quite an odd way to structure
it. Andrew?
Yeah, so the water regulator will set the standards that sort of have to be achieved. So at the moment, there's still some discussion to be taking place over exactly what the standards are and how long the water entities will have to comply. So my understanding, there's about a third of wastewater treatment plants will be outside their consent next year. So it's something that can't be addressed in the first year. It will take some time. But over time, the water entity will have to manage to the water standards. So if you look at Scottish Water, for example, they're 99-point-something% compliant with the water standards. So while there's going to be a transition period to get compliant for the New Zealand sector, over time they will become compliant. And if you're not compliant, then the regulator will have ability to do things such as impose fines, and in extreme cases there may well be government intervention.
All right, we'll go through the list. I've got quite a few people on the list, so it's a max of 2 each. Councillor Brown.
Thanks. Mark, if we establish this amalgamated enterprise and it assumes a level of debt on day one and then borrows subsequently, are you envisaging that we will only guarantee our sliver of the debt, or will there be a sort of a joint and several type situation?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, we will leave that up to the shareholding councils as they put together the structure, because it could be done on a whole number of support mechanisms, right? Based on population, based on debt levels.
So at this flexibility, how at the moment, because your pricing is based on S&P ratings, and obviously we've got a good rating, and not all the other councils are as creditworthy. How will the funding of the water enterprise be done, given you'll have that sort of heterogeneous credit situation?
Yep, it'll be one. It's probably one for Andrew, but it'll be based on the average credit of the shareholders, of the guarantors of the multiply owned water CCO. So, if there's some at AA, some at A+, then it's going to be an average.
And
Sorry, Tom, I have to put you back on the list. We've got quite a few.
Okay.
No, that was 2.
Oh.
That was 2. I can count to 2. Councillor Abdurrahman.
And here you mentioned advantage of water CEOs for councils, and it's my understanding that is not applicable for WCC. If not, what is in it for us?
Is your question about the debt headroom, Councillor?
Well, all of them are interrelated. There are 5 points here. Yep. Yeah.
Can you repeat the question, please, Councillor?
So freeing that debt headroom was mentioned as an advantage here. But in our case, it's my understanding that is not going to be advantageous for us.
Yes,
if not, what is the whole CCO model? What is in it for us?
So if we were to have a regional CCO, the regional CCO would be able to go up to the 500 or the equivalent to 500 debt to revenue. So if we're to have a regional CCO, we can absolutely do that. If we were to establish our own CCO, we could also go up to that limit.
Yeah, but as part of that, it's not freeing any at the headroom for us, isn't it? That's my question. If we just go to the regional model.
So you're looking at the council excluding waters?
Yes.
I think I'm trying to think of what the question is here, Councillor. In terms of the remainder of the council borrowings,
yes,
that would still sit at 280%.
So does it make some part free, because now we are not borrowing for water that is not in our balance sheet?
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't.
So that means the regional model is not advantageous in this case, other than borrowing for up to 500 when it just be the regional model.
If you're purely looking at that as being the only metric, but there's numerous other benefits to bringing, to restructuring like this. So this is, if you're only looking at debt and that being your only decision maker, that would be the only reason that you would change.
Okay, my second question.
No, that's been more than one. Deputy Mayor Fung.
Thank you. My question is around being a guarantor of the debt and just how, if the water services entity starts to, we get quite a bit of exposure, how do we rein that in? So I'm just looking at the risk around that when we've already got a lot of our own debt that we're trying to manage.
Yep, I'll let Andrew answer that one.
Yeah. So the intention, if you look at the previous government's 10 entity model, the only entity that was investment grade on day one was Watercare, or entity A. So what we want to see, and I think you will want to see as well, is if water CCOs are established, that they get to an investment grade credit standing in their own name, because that de-risks it for LGFA, for the water entity, and for the councils as a guarantor. So you have the issue now if the water assets stay within the council, you've got the challenge of having to do all the capex that's going to be needed to require to comply with the water standards. So if you move it to a CCO, it is unlikely to be investment grade on day one, so it's going to take a number of years to sort of build up the revenue and the depth in the organisation. But we would imagine in 5 to 10 years' time, the water entity will get to an investment grade credit standing in its own name. At that stage, you will have the option to do what Auckland is doing and decide not to guarantee it if that's what you think is in the best interests of your residents. But likewise, you might think the benefit of being able to obtain financing from LGFA, which is rated AAA, outweighs the risks. But once it gets to investment grade, if you look around the world, the performance of investment grade water utilities is exceptionally good. So if you go to Australia, for example, there's never been a water entity that's got into any financial difficulty. So I think once we can get the water entities to that place, then everyone will be on good standing.
Councillor McNulty.
Yeah, sorry, Andrea just said it before, sorry, I was watching on YouTube for a moment there. So a regional water entity on the slide can borrow up to 500%. Can we just clarify that a CCO solely owned water entity can also borrow up to 500%?
It will depend a little bit on the size of the water entity. So, for example, Wellington, if you set up your own water CCO, you're going to have a lot more scale than, say, Carterton. What we're trying to do is align the covenants to make them consistent with an investment grade credit rating from Standard & Poor's. So there may well be difference that small entities may not be able to, water entities may not be able to borrow quite as much as a larger water entity such as Watercare. But I think Wellington's in a good place because it's reasonably large to start with. But all water entities will be able to borrow more than what councils can at the moment. That's quite clear. But the exact amount will depend on the size of the water entity.
And can I, excuse me, through you, Chair, can I just add to that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Andrew and Mark, those negotiations have to occur with the board under the current settings to apply as a CCO. It's not a given that you would go straight to the 500% debt to revenue or equivalent. That would have to be assessed by the team at LGFA with the new water entity, regardless of its structure.
Do you have an
That's right. So we've tested those. We've tested some of the preliminary financials with a couple of the regional sort of entities, and all the numbers seem consistent with what we're talking about and what Standard & Poor's would require to get an investment grade. As we mentioned, the water entity might not be compliant with the covenants in year 1 or 2, so we might have a pathway for them to move to get to where they need to be in terms of being compliant.
Councillor Chung.
Thanks. I have 2 questions first. What's the relationship, if any, between LGNZ and LGFA?
There is absolutely no relationship at all. We're owned by the government, 20% owned by the government and 80% by councils. We don't have any. We have more relationship with Taitara. So we sponsor a number of their awards, and so we focus our relationship on, I suppose, at the management and the staff level as opposed to the political level.
Great, thank you. Second question is, you've got down water meters here and state independent revenue. Now, why is that? Because a council would charge for water regardless of whether they use water meters as the charging measurement, or where they charge for water based on a based on a fixed amount. So why do you actually differentiate that?
Andrew, I'll let you talk to that one.
Yeah. So the LGFA board thinks that water meters is best practice. There's probably consultants such as Crown Infrastructure Partners that would be better placed to advise you on the merits of them. So one, they are, particularly good at detecting leaks, and also when you have volumetric charging, you have some ability to influence demand. So if you speak to Kapiti, for example, that demand for water once you started charging it sort of fell. And I think that's particularly in areas where you're going to have a lot of gardens and things, and people will use water to water their garden if it's free, as opposed to putting in a separate sort of rain tank. We appreciate not all the councils have water meters in place, so there may well be some transition period to install water meters, depending on the capacity of the industry to supply them. And in the meantime, that the revenue will be collected through council rates. But they're not absolutely essential. So if you go to Scotland, for example, Scotland have commercial meters, water meters for commercial users, and they still collect residential charges through council rates. So it's not absolutely essential, but I think if you look around the world, it is best practice.
Councillor Wineta.
Do we anticipate that the 3 independence requirements here are likely to be common across all proposed models? i.e. independent governance, independent revenue, independent grade credit rating metrics?
Across all the proposed models, you mean in terms of the community trusts?
Yes.
No, this is only a requirement from an LGFA perspective. Okay, so it could come into legislation. We're not sure. We're not having any involvement in the legislation drafting.
Councillor Free.
Thank you. So can you explain, and sorry if I was out of the room when you did explain it, can you explain what it means to be that regional water entity has full asset ownership but is still financially supported by parent councils? What does still financially supported by parent councils mean? It's in tick box 2.
That's through the guarantee that we would provide to the entity. So Andrew might have a better...
Yeah, I really need to understand this because it's concerning me.
So I think there's sort of 2 parts. So one is about the asset ownership. So the full asset ownership is what Watercare has at the moment. The operational model is what the current Wellington Water is at the moment. And in that case, the debt and the assets remain with the individual councils. So in that case, the water entity has no debt, so you wouldn't need to provide a guarantee to the water entity because the debt still sits with the council. We know Waikato are looking at the operational model as the first step in their one. So it's possible some councils might go down that path. But where the water debt is transferred to the water CCO, then for the water CCO to borrow from LGFA, it's going to require the council to provide a guarantee or uncalled capital to the water CCO.
So suppose you had an entity which sort of had 4 councils in it, but like we've just had in the previous discussion, Wellington City Council has a low debt. Some others may have higher debt. Does the debt stay ring-fenced to the component councils? And does the amount of the work that the CCO doing stay ring-fenced to the councils?
I think that'll be a question that's probably taken through the governance structure, Councillor Free, as opposed to the funding lines.
I'm really concerned about that we don't, can we refinance? We have low debt on our water, but is it possible through LGFA to actually take out some debt on our water to get repaid for some of that?
We fund our balance sheet at council on a portfolio basis, so we don't, and it's driven by the
Perhaps-
security certificates.
Perhaps
we
I
give
can
as a-
help. I think when we transfer our assets, the intent is that we will be transferring some of our debt as well.
I see.
Yeah? I think
Because this has a relevance to our whole conversation about debt headroom.
Yes. And what I've said around the amount of transfer of the debt, what we'd only be looking to do as a regional model is only propose a regional model if it leaves us in the same headroom position as we are now.
Okay, so if we didn't have...
I'm sorry, I've got about 4 more councillors who have another round of questions.
This
Councillor.
seems like an incredibly important point.
I know, but we can't rate the questions on their importance. But can we go over by about 5 minutes? Is that all right? And I'll come back to you, Councillor Free. That's okay. Councillor Rogers.
Yeah, my question was about the lead-in time for councils or CCOs being investment grade, and out of your sort of $20 billion worth of borrowing, how much of that is going to have a negative effect on total borrowings and the sort of rating of LGFA in total when that debt then moves into entities with significantly lower credit ratings?
Yep, so it's a really good question. So it goes to the heart of the LGFA operating model in that we're basically borrowing money cheaply based on a very good credit rating. Our credit rating is very high, the same as the government, because of the financial structure that we've got. And we've increased our capital. We're increasing our capital position at the moment. The fact is that our lending is secured against rates as well too, or the uncalled capital. So we're very confident that we're going to maintain our credit rating. Going forward, the board is very focused on that as one of the key objectives, is to maintain the credit rating parity with the sovereign. So everything we do will be, this is why we are taking our time over the challenge to us from the government about lending to unsupported water entities, because that will then lead to a deterioration in the credit quality of our lending book. As it stands at the moment, it will not lead to a deterioration in the credit quality.
Councillor Brown, you had one more? Sorry. You've forgotten it? Great. Not that it's great that you've forgotten it.
Geordie's.
Oh, yes.
Just there is an extension of the council's credit rating to these water entities. So they will get notched up, if you like, into a better credit rating because of the relationship with the councils that are supporting it. And that's one of the functions that the guarantee provides.
Councillor Abdurrahman? No? Okay. Deputy Mayor Foon?
Just to clarify, under likely requirements where you've got independent revenue water meters in brackets, just to clarify your statement before that wasn't necessary, but can I clarify you are not expecting it to be the revenue instigator?
Andrew?
Yeah, we're not expecting water meters to be in place in year 1, but I think there's a discussion to be had about in the medium term that they be put in place. So you can see that model working very well on Auckland with Watercare. Everyone gets a bill each month. So Watercare collects its own sort of revenue independently from the council. So we think when we look around the rest of the world, that's the model that we tend to see working very well.
But at this stage, does that mean it's a requirement?
It's something to be discussed. There's a number of things, as we've talked about, like the guaranteed structure, for example, that we will discuss with each regional sort of water sort of grouping to work through a pathway that's going to be satisfactory to both parties.
Okay, thank you.
We also have to see what the legislation is. So the governance in particular might be part of the third water bill, in which case, it's not up for discussion because it's the law. So I think we'll be able to be a lot more specific on these questions once we see the third water legislation.
Lucky last, Councillor Free, sorry to interrupt your train of thought.
No, it's fine. I think I've had the answers I'm going to get.
Okay, thank you so much, Sarah, Mark and Andrew. We really appreciate that. It was an extremely illuminating session. Thank you.
Thank you.